It's Miss Meyer with another episode of the Miss Meyer Show. So we are on chapter 6 part 2 this week, and we're going to be covering pretty much the whole rest of chapter 6. So I wanted to start first by going over, just the things that we're going to be talking about. And we're going to talk about the new social order and how the role of the slave changed in antebellum Louisiana from what it had been under France and Spain. We're going to talk about political factions, balance of power. We're talking about the War of Mexico, Manifest Destiny, the new parishes. We're going to talk about the 1845 Constitution, the Compromise of 1850, the 1852 Constitution, and I think that's pretty much it. Okay, so I know it's a good chunk of pages that I put in for your assignment for this week, but we're only going over a couple of things on each page, so you don't have to freak out and be like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, that's just too much, because I'm not going to make you, it's only a couple of things. So what I wanted you to know about the new social order, and that's on page 212, I want you to understand mostly that when Louisiana became part of the United States, things changed as far as free people of color went. Now, in Louisiana, especially in New Orleans, you had people from all different walks of life, all different, backgrounds and things like that. You had your Acadians, your Isleños, your French, your Spanish, your Creole, all of that. And there was another big group, and that was called the Free People of Color. And that's because in the Code Noir and in, the Proclamation for Good Government, there was a process that was called manumission. And what it was is that it allowed a slave to buy their own freedom. And this resulted in a huge number of free people of color in the state of Louisiana. So you had people that were, maybe once before were slaves, or, maybe their father was a slave, but then he became a freeman, and all these other kind of things. And they were a huge part of Louisiana. At the time of the Louisiana Purchase, 20% of Louisiana were free people of color. 10 years later, 40% of Louisiana were free people of color. So that's a huge chunk of your society. Marie Laveau, that's a big thing in New Orleans. She was a free woman of color. I mean, so it was a huge part of what was Louisiana. But once we joined the United States, the rules regarding slavery changed. And it was strange to see how that did. And the first thing that really changed was they changed the whole process of manumission and allowing slaves to buy their freedom, and they instituted a new rule that the states would follow, Louisiana as well, and that was called the Black Codes. Now, what the Black Codes were, it was just basically saying that the slaves were not people, they were property, and they did not know how to govern themselves, and they were not able mentally, physically, emotionally to handle being, a free person. So these laws, codes, were put into place and they said they were for everyone's protection, the slave included. It really wasn't. So what these three things did is that it chipped away for the humanity of the slaves even farther. The first thing that it did, it said that the slaves could no longer seek legal representation. Under France and Spain, if a slave was mistreated or beaten or something happened to them, the slave would have the opportunity to, even at one point, appear in court and say, hey, this is what happened to me. This is not right. And have, people make judgments on that. Well, the Black Codes changed that. And they said, no, you don't have the right to appear in court if you have a grievance to file or something like that. If you have a problem, you can go take it up with your slave owner or the white overseer or someone. But you can imagine how responsive the slave owner or the overseer would be to any problems that the slave was having. I mean, really. So basically, with the Black Code, slaves could be, your owner or your overseer could do whatever they wanted to you. Because who would you report to? Let's say if you're going to go report an incident that your owner beat you up, and you go and tell your overseer, which is underneath the owner, and he goes and tells the owner, hey, she came and complained to me because I beat her up, because you beat her up, he's going to go beat her up even some more. So it was a really just, it was senseless. It really was. And the second thing that it did, it said, another big thing is it ended the whole manumission. It said, no longer can you purchase your freedom. If you were born a slave, you were going to die a slave. And that meant, you know, that anyone, I mean, little bitty babies that were born and to men and women, they were thought of as property from the moment they drew their first breath to the moment they died. And it was just unbelievable. What else the Black Codes did is it took away their freedoms. It said that, you know, you can't do what you wanted to do. You could not be out at certain hours. You had to have permission. You had to do all these things that the free people of color said, hey, you can't do that to us, because they were taking away these rights, not only from the slaves, but from the free people of color. And towards the end of antebellum Louisiana, like right before the Civil War, it started to be that, you know, the free people of color were either left Louisiana for somewhere else, and Louisiana was very, very unique in that it protected the free people of color much more than any other state did. But once the Black Codes came in and replaced all the, you know, the Code Noir and the Proclamation for Good Government, all that changed. So that's why we had such a huge population of free people of color, because here they had rights, they had freedoms, they were basic citizens. And so, but when the Black Codes did start to kind of really take over, we see that change. People don't want to be here anymore. They're like, okay, well, look, I'm going to leave. But they say, well, where are you going to go? Because only in Louisiana are you this protected. So where else can you go? So some of them would try to go, you know, maybe North Canada, down south. But a lot of them, they just went back into slavery because they said, this is just, you know, it's not worth it. And that's a really big shame, because if you were a free person of color, you were treated really horribly because they felt like, oh, you know, we're not going to do anything with you, and you're not a slave and you're not a person. It was just really hard. So a lot of them, you know, decided to go back into that horrible situation. And the last thing that the Black Codes did, and it was a really big detriment to Louisiana and the South, but it really, I made clear markers between black and white. And what it did was that everybody, you know, it said, like, basically, you're different. And it let people know that you're not the same. And this group is better than this group. And it really just drove that home. So, you know, you've got, this is when it starts this entire bit of utter racism and just horrible things that were happening start here. Because before in Louisiana under France and Spain, there weren't very clear-cut, you know, boundary lines. You're black or you're white and you're, you know, a Creole and you're Cajun. They were there, but they weren't as predominant as they were when the Black Codes came. You know, before, look at, you had all the pirates, and, you know, you had women, Creole women, and all these other kind of things, cultures intermingling big time. But once this starts happening, that's over, because it really put stipulations, and it said, hey, you know what? You're black, I'm white, I'm better, you're not. You know, it was just, this is where it starts to go. And so, and people start seeing this. Northern states start seeing this. People in Louisiana start seeing this. And they start saying, well, this is just not right. This is something that I can't abide by. And those feelings and those, I guess, just feelings of just anger and frustration really kind of push forward into what would become the Civil War. Now, one of the things that drives me crazy, especially when we're talking about slavery in antebellum Louisiana and antebellum South, anywhere, was the ideology of slavery. And what the ideology means is they try to justify their actions by saying, this is for the betterment of everyone. Ideology is kind of what we see when we watch movies like Gone with the Wind. It's perception. We've learned about that last class. It's like, oh, you know, but it's such a beautiful way of life. No, it is not. There is no ideology. When you look at something and you have an ideology of it, you're not unnecessarily thinking of it the reality. You're thinking of it the way that you feel about it. It's kind of like, I don't know, you ever go somewhere when you're little and you think it's like the greatest place ever, and you're like, I just love this place, I can't wait to come back. And then you go as an adult and you're like, this isn't that great. Was it always this bad, or is it just me? Well, yeah, it was always that bad, but your young ideology with it was that you were seeing it, in a different way. Slavery was much the same way, in the fact that many people, even today, tend to look at it through rose-colored glasses. And what that means is that they look at it and they're like, oh, it wasn't that, yeah, it happened a long time ago, and this and that. They'll watch movies like Gone with the Wind, or, Raintree County. That's another old movie, and I can't think of anything else. They'll look at the pictures and the dresses and all this kind of thing, and they'll have this warped mindset of what slavery was. The reality of slavery was horrible, was completely horrible. But this is the day before we had, instant news. We didn't have people going in there with their cell phones and live feeding and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of people, even in the North and overseas, they didn't see really what was going on. So that really allowed this ideology to take place, because people were not there to say, oh my gosh, this is what's happening. It's so easy for us to kind of turn a blind eye to something if we don't see what's going on. Case in point, there's some horrible things going on in Nicaragua right now. In my grandmother was from Nicaragua. And so, but to many people here, you live in the United States, we're like, what's going on in Nicaragua? But for me, as someone who is a descendant from someone from Nicaragua, I'm seeing it, and I'm like, how can we not pay attention? How is this not all over the news? Well, because it's just not important, I guess, for American news feed. Slavery at this time was not a big news story. This is not something that people were like, oh, this is going on, this is going on. Now later, yes, it would become. But during the antebellum period, especially in the time when the whole cash crops were coming into Louisiana, and we see a huge influx of domestic slave trade happening, slavery was not the topic of conversation in the day. It wasn't. And a lot of people that lived with the notion of slavery in the South, they believed that they were doing what was just right. They believed that they were, had justified slavery, and they said, yeah, we should definitely have this. This is a way for us to kind of grow, and it's a necessity, and it's this, and it's that. And they used all kind of just stuff to kind of justify what they're doing, saying, oh, well, it's okay if I do this because X, Y, Z, which is so crazy. They used the Bible. They used any kind of things that they would get their hands on, and they would say, see, well, it's in here, so I guess I'm doing an okay thing. It's not the way it works, okay? So it was just a misuse of information, a misuse of religion, a misuse of any kind of thing that they had to say, well, this is the reason that I'm doing this. And what that tells me more than anything in their justification or their attempted justification of slavery, it lets me know that deep down, they might have had some convictions about it, because you're not going to justify yourself unless you feel that you're doing something wrong. It's kind of like when you have to constantly say, well, I'm doing the right thing. I know I'm doing the right thing. Who are you trying to convince? You or the other person or yourself? And so through this justification, we see that they knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew this. And because they knew this, they tried to justify it by saying, okay, well, we're doing this for a greater good. That just shows me that they knew what they were doing was just unbelievably inhumane and just terrible. And that gives you kind of an insight into the mind of an antebellum Louisianian, in my point of view. So Louisiana now is being run. Our two big markets right now are sugar and cotton. And we are running our state on these big industries, sugar and cotton, and it's all being built on the backs of forced slavery, domestic slavery. What was once in Louisiana very open laws for just a very protection of free people of color, for slaves who wanted to gain their freedom. We were that. But once we joined the United States and we adopted the Black Codes, that was over with. And this is just one more step towards the Civil War. I think I could probably, I don't know, I'm trying to change my light here. I've got a crazy light, y'all. I'll change it to that. Okay, so when, actually, wait, hold on. Blue, yellow, isn't that cool? Yellow, blue, that's yellow and white. Blue, let's do this one, okay? So, okay, ooh, I don't know. I just hate this. Oh, this is so hard. I think I do that. Ooh. So once the Louisiana Purchase took place, you had all this available land. You had people coming over to Louisiana, and you had to, you had all this huge amount of land that was more than Louisiana. So the question began, like, what other states are going to be a part of this? Because Louisiana itself was just one little piece at the very bottom. There were many other, areas that could definitely be states. So in order to become a state, you had to have 60,000 people and have a constitution approved by Congress. Well, Louisiana did that, and we were entered into the Union in 1812, right around the War of 1812. That's when we came into the Union. Now, Louisiana was growing, and they had a lot of people that wanted to come to live here, and not only because of the economic benefits, the people wanting to go and live here with all the cash crops and the money to be made, but you also had here groups of people that made it really entice people to come. You had many different groups. You had Germans, Irish, Italians, French, you had Cajun, all the Spanish, all here in this one state. So a lot of people were coming here. You had a massive influx of people. So with that, we see a big shift in the politics of Louisiana. The biggest thing is that most of these people that are coming here, especially from other places, Europe and so forth, are coming in. They're coming in through the Gulf of Mexico, and they're coming through the port of New Orleans, and a lot of them stayed in New Orleans. Now, this was an issue with Louisiana representation in our capital. Okay, so we had right now in our capital city, which was New Orleans. New Orleans was, again, our capital city. Started out as that. It was the center of trade, business, government, center of everything. Then it moved to Donaldsonville for a little period of time. They said that was a bad idea. They didn't like that. And so they moved it back to New Orleans, where people were like, I don't like that. I don't want it here in New Orleans. Well, eventually, after they were in New Orleans, they moved it to Baton Rouge, where it is today. But the reason that they did this is because they didn't like that New Orleans was considered the most favorite city in all of Louisiana. People were like, that's just not fair. Why is it always New Orleans? Even today, when you hear like, oh, you're from Louisiana, when you say Louisiana, people automatically think, well, not so much anymore, but they start, oh, I love New Orleans, or whatever, New Orleans, you're from New Orleans, so that's a big deal. So when people here in Texas, they hear me speaking, because apparently I have an accent. I don't hear it, but apparently they do. And so they'll say like, oh, where are you from? Are you from New York? I'm like, no, I'm from New Orleans. And they're like, I love New Orleans, because New Orleans has this kind of like, I guess this role in being this happy, fun city where people go and just have a good time. And it's always been like that. It's always like this. But a lot of people that were in Louisiana at that time, and even today, there's gorgeous places all over Louisiana, but New Orleans does get a majority of the focus because it's New Orleans. But the people that were living all throughout Louisiana were saying it's just not fair, because we, now that we're part of the United States, we have a role to play in government. A democratic government, is a rule by the people. Well, we are not being equally represented, because all the representatives from Louisiana who go over to DC or Washington and have all these, voting in Congress and in the Senate and the House, it's not fair, because they're all coming from New Orleans, whereas there's a huge population of people all throughout Louisiana. So there was a huge, big balance of power going on in Louisiana at that time. On the other hand, outside of Louisiana, in general, with the United States, we start to see that there's a huge issue of these other states joining the Union. Now, the issue is, what are they going to join as? Now, Louisiana, when we joined in 1812, we joined as a slave state. And eventually, as the other states grew, there was a balance of power. Excuse me. Y'all see how my thumbs, I'm double jointed in my thumbs. See how it does that? It's so weird, huh? I know, it's like this. It's so strange. But anyway, so you had an equal number of slave states and an equal number of free states when Louisiana joined. After Louisiana joined and other states wanted to come in, it would have thrown off the balance. Like there would be more slave states or more free states than the other, okay? And that would have thrown the balance off. Well, in 1820, Congress passed what's the Missouri Compromise. And this was something that was created because of Missouri. Now, Missouri wanted to enter into the Union as the state of Missouri because they were originally the territory. So the territory of Missouri requested to be admitted into the United States as a slave state. Now, if they did that and they were a slave state, that would mean that there would be more slave states than free states. Well, the other states, the free states, said that's just not fair. It's going to be an unequal balance of power. So we need to do something. We need to make sure that we have an equal representation. Because if you had more in one, you had more free states than slave states, any legislation that benefited the slave states was more than likely going to not fail, okay? Because it would be unequal. Well, Louisiana, we were a slave state. So we were like, hey, come on, Missouri, join our team. Well, the other people in the United States were not for this. So the Missouri Compromise basically put this balance between the free and slave states for a period of time. And it worked for a period of time. So it said anything that was a boundary, they put a border. Let me show you, like, here's the border. Where is it? I'm trying to see. Okay, so this right here is the border. It was a line. I'm going to show you guys right up here. And hopefully you can see it. See this line? Am I putting on the right one? Yes, it's right here. This line right here. I should have highlighted it. Let me highlight it. Don't write in your books unless you own them. I own this one. Don't write in them. All right. Okay. So I highlighted it for you. And wow, I look really, really white when that happens. Do y'all see that line? So with the Missouri Compromise, any state that was admitted into the Union below this line would be entered in as a free state. Any state that entered into the Union above this line, with the exception of Missouri, was a free state. That's what it said. It said, okay, we're going to let Missouri enter in as a slave state, but any other states, you're going to be a free state. Because look at all of this. They had these big, they had lots more. So they pretty much thought, and all of this belonged to Mexico. So we didn't have that yet. So when they established the Missouri Compromise, it looked as though the free states were getting the better deal because look how much more land they had. Okay? So this made sense. Everybody agreed, you know, the slave states agreed, the free states agreed. And then came the war with Mexico. Now, the war with Mexico is a big deal, especially here in Texas, where I am, where I live. I don't say I'm from Texas because I'm from Louisiana, right? Dalmatians, high five. There we go. So, in the Texas, though, we were part of Mexico. We were first part of, you know, we were Spanish. We were under the Spanish flag. So in Texas, Texas was under the control of Mexico. Mexico ran Texas. And the problem is that Texas was fighting for their independence. They said, we don't want to be part of Mexico anymore. We want to be part of the United States. Well, Santa Anna, who was the leader in Mexico, said, oh, no, you're not. You're not going anywhere. You are a part of us, and you're not leaving. But the Texans, they said, oh, no, we are going. And they went to war for their independence. And that's why Texas is actually very unique, because we were our own country for a period of years there, and we still maintain some of the rights that are very unique to Texas, and that's why there's so much Texas pride. People are like, yeah, Texas, I'm from Texas. It's big here, okay? It's massive. It's Texans and all this other kind of stuff, because we were once our own country. Louisiana was our own country too for a very short period of time in between the different rulings, like very short period of time, but we still were. But anyway, so Texas wants to join the United States. They go and they fight for their independence, and President Polk, James K. Polk, who's over in the United States, he supports that because he knows that Texas wants to join the United States. Texas was never, ever happy. The goal was never to like, oh, let's become our own country and exist just as our own country. And they were called the Republic of Texas, and that was their country. That was not the plan. Sam Houston, that was not his idea. His idea was always to join the United States because he knew that if he was just the Republic of Texas, that they would be very vulnerable. They would need the help of the United States. So when they went to fight Mexico and they went to fight Santa Anna, a war with Mexico broke out in the United States as well. So James K. Polk, who was the president, he sent troops to help the Texans defeat Santa Anna. And if you guys, I know you guys probably don't know too much about Texas history because it's all over, it's like, it's thrown in your face here, but we lost the Battle of the Alamo. We lost that battle. Most of them died. Okay, so most of the Texans died. We did, however, win the war, but we did lose the Battle of San Antonio, the mission. It was a big church. We lost, okay? Just know that. We did not ever win. Some people are like, yeah, we won the Alamo. I'm like, remember the Alamo because they all died. But you know, whatever. Not everyone is as smart as you guys. So anyway, so Texas now is independent from Mexico. They're their own republic, the Republic of Texas. Like my kids, they say the Texas Pledge after the American pledge. You know, I pledge allegiance. They say that the Texas one because we have our own, and they say it too. I mean, it's serious. Texas pride is a real thing. So anyway, so Texas decides we want to be part of the United States. And so Polk is like, yeah, well, I want you here too. But the problem is that Texas wants to join as a slave state. So once again, this whole balance of power thing is a big, big issue. Because if Texas joins as a slave state, the number of slave states would be more than the number of free states. And that would create an imbalance of power. So this is the problem. When Mexico signed the treaty that ended the Mexican-American War, and that treaty was the Treaty of Ildefonso, I'm believing. Gosh, I had taught Texas history for a while, and I want to make sure I'm telling you the right name. The Treaty of San Hidalgo. Am I saying it's right? Where is it? Treaty of Guadalupe, yes, that's it. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and that's where Santa Anna signed over and said, okay, we're giving up, we're not going to keep Texas, and also gave a huge part of land over to the United States. All of this extra land right here. You see? So when they started with the Missouri Compromise, they said, oh, the North's got a better deal because look at all this land. The South only has this. Well, after the war with Mexico and Texas independence, now the South would have access to an equal part. So they knew that if they didn't put regulations on this new big section of land that was joining the United States, this whole balance of power would once again be out of whack. So they decided that they were going to create a new kind of like a new plan, basically, a whole new issue to keep things, you know, one way or the other. And with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the Mexicans officials agreed to give up claims to Texas and also gave them a huge chunk of land that would one day become California, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, parts of Arizona, Colorado, and Wyoming. So that's a lot of land. So what they did is they really put this whole question of how are we going to do this? How are we going to make it so that representation is equal? What are we going to do? Because these new territories had the option to choose whether if they were slave states or free states. So once again, because Texas was saying we want to be a slave state, they had all these other states. They were territories right now. So they weren't able to be a state. They weren't able to choose whether or not they wanted to be slave or free because they didn't have the people and they didn't have the Constitution. Texas did. They were preparing this like the whole time. So they were able to join easily, but they knew that once these other states were going to, other territories, were going to have the qualifications for statehood, they would have to make that choice as well, and that would probably throw things off. So that's going on in the United States, that whole question of equality, slave states, free states. In Louisiana, though, we have a big issue with our own representation as far as our state government. Now, like I had said before, we are a democracy. We are a representative democracy, meaning that we vote for representatives to speak on our behalf. Now, the problem was in Louisiana, those representatives were based on population. So the more people that lived in your area or your parish, the more representatives you would have. So obviously, New Orleans was the biggest place. That was the biggest place, had the most people. So, of course, they're going to have the most representatives. Well, the other people living in Louisiana said, well, this is not fair because New Orleans has the most amount of people. All legislation that gets passed is very beneficial to New Orleans and not really that beneficial to anyone else. It's just not fair. So they decided that they were going to try and make it more equal. So what they put into place is something very, like we're going to see on the main scale next chapter, is the 3/5 compromise. So Louisiana said we wanted to make it so that the smaller parishes, smaller areas would have, like I said, same kind of similar representation. So the way that they were going to do that is they were going to allow these smaller parishes to count their slaves, because New Orleans had a lot of people living there, but other places like in upper Louisiana and so forth, you had big plantations. So you had lots of people, but they were not necessarily citizens. They weren't considered citizens. They were slaves. So these smaller little places went to the Louisiana, Congress and said, we want to count our slaves as part of our population so that we can be equally represented as well. Well, this was a big issue. You had New Orleanians that were saying, no, that's not fair. You don't even consider slaves to be people, but you're going to count them in your population. Do they have a representative? No, so they shouldn't be counted. Well, in the end, it kind of won out. They kind of made peace. And they said, okay, so what we're going to do is that the slaves are going to be counted as populations with one section of government. And then the other section, it's going to be just population of free voting individuals. So it kind of made it so that the House, and like I said, you will see that, and you even see it today, is the House is given is based on population. The number of you have the number of representatives that is with your population. And in the Senate, it was all the same. Like everybody had 2, every single person. This was an issue, the people in New Orleans weren't happy about this, but it was kind of like a compromise. And we do learn more about that later on. So that's why I'm not going into it too much. So Louisiana, though, they've got a lot of people that are really starting to clamor and say, well, hey, you know what? I kind of like this new way of thinking. Remember, because when we left after Spain and after France, the people of Louisiana were not used to this representative government. They didn't like it. They wanted somebody kind of in control because they were so used to being underneath the crown of France or the crown of Spain. So this whole idea of democracy and representative democracy was really scary to them. Well, eventually they start saying, I kind of like having a voice in my government. This is kind of a big deal. I really like this. And so they started telling Louisiana, hey, we want to change something. We looked at our Constitution, the original Constitution in 1812 that we did when we first became a state, and now we want to make some changes because we don't really like all that stuff that's in there. So the Louisiana government says, okay, well, let's look at some of the changes that you want to make. So they drafted a new Constitution in 1845, and in this new Constitution, it made some big changes. And, oh, gosh, I'm thirsty, and Un momento. That's like really red. Okay. So, so they changed these new things. One of the big things that they did is that they changed let me adjust my camera. Is it okay? I don't know. This is like, I use a camera. I have this mounting deal that's supposed to keep it. I don't care. I don't like it. I don't know why. And this light is super hot. Oh, it's really hot. All right. I'm going to have to edit all this out. I don't know. Hair is a disaster. Oh, well. So this new compromise, it changed a couple of things. And what it did was it removed the voting tax, because there was a tax that you had to pay to vote, and you had to own property. Well, the majority of people in Louisiana were not rich landowners. Despite what, you know, pop culture or, you know, whatever shows you, they were not these big plantation owners, not in Louisiana. The majority of people were poor farmers. So by having this tax and this property requirement, they were actually keeping a lot of people from having the ability to vote. So when they decided that they were going to not get rid of that, they allowed more people to participate in Louisiana's government. And that was a big thing. It also made it so that all government representation, wow, I was like, woo! It made it so that all government positions were elected and they were no longer given, because it was a fact at a point right here in the beginning before this compromise that officials were kind of given their jobs because of, not because of the, you know, what they could do or who they were elected by, they were just given to them. And so with this new constitution, it made it so that you had to actually be elected in order to be, you know, part of the government. And this really made the people of Louisiana feel that, hey, you know, we have a real say here. We're really participating, and they were really liking it. It was a big thing. It also prohibited monopolies. It said that you can't have all of one thing in one place. You had to separate things around. And that was a true dig at New Orleans, because New Orleans, you know, everybody was like, oh, New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans. And they said, you can't be a monopoly on something, which is like New Orleans at this time was the seat of government. It was the business place. It was where everything happened. And they didn't want that. They wanted to change and kind of disperse it throughout the state. It also provided funding. This new constitution provided funding for a jail, which, you know, it's Louisiana, right? And a public school system, which was a really big deal because we had a lot of people that were coming here, and hence a lot of kids, okay? And then it also created a new office of lieutenant governor, kind of like the governor's assistant, to really help the governor kind of, you know, disperse power and do things like that. It was a really big deal. And like I said before, they decided to move the capital of Louisiana from New Orleans, because remember, it was first New Orleans, then Donaldsonville. That was a big mistake. Then they moved it back to New Orleans, but then they decided they were going to put it in Shreveport. I mean, not Shreveport. Whoops. They were going to put it in Baton Rouge, because they said that it was a perfect distance. It was not too close to New Orleans, but it was still close enough that it could get to the Mississippi River. So that's all working, okay? So Louisiana, at this point, with our new compromise, with our new kind of stance on representation, all of this is happening. Louisiana's kind of like, okay, we got our stuff together. That's good. Well, of course, more people start coming to Louisiana, even more people. And it throws the balance of power off once again. So now you've got a new state that entered into the Union at this time. So what's going on in America right now, while Louisiana starts getting all up in arms again about the Constitution, California enters as a free state. So now they're, you know, once again, this whole balance of slave state, free state is kind of going like this. And that tension is felt in Louisiana, because as they are debating and they're saying, oh, this should happen because California is entering as a free state, this should happen or this should happen. Tensions rise in Louisiana over similar issues, but mainly in representation, because the whole thing, that the argument with California joining as a free state would be that it would throw off the representation of free states and slave states. Louisiana starts, you know, giving their opinion, saying what they're thinking, and that makes them say, hey, you know what, I don't think our representation is really fair here in Louisiana between northern parishes and southern parishes and New Orleans compared to everybody else. So once again, Louisiana's like, slow up, let's fix this. So they come in and they create a new compromise. Now this compromise is the compromise of 1850. So in the 1852, Louisiana decides that they are going to write another constitution. And they decide this because of the things that were changing with the Compromise of 1850. There was more people, there was a bigger anti-slavery movement, and word was getting out there what was happening. And we see an overall kind of just not liking what Louisiana was doing. They just were not as happy with the plan with the with the second constitution, the 1845 constitution, so they drew up another one. And in this new constitution, it lifted the ban on state funding to private businesses because there was still some funding to private industries. It said that all convicts that were in the new jail could not vote. It made all government positions elected and not just given. And it divided Louisiana into 4 different voting districts. And I think I've got that somewhere in here. Un momento. Well, no, I don't. But it did. It basically put it into voting districts. Really kind of making things a little bit more uniform for Louisiana and able to follow. Because, you know, Louisiana with all the different squiggly lines everywhere was just getting crazy. So they divided it into just 4 different districts. The most significant change was in determining legislative representative. So instead of just counting just, you know, the population, excluding slaves for the state senate, because that's how it was. Remember it said oh, I'm messing up. Oh my gosh. So before, when they counted slaves and, you know, free people as one unit with population. Let me fix this. I'm going to do a lot of editing. So the most significant change dealt with determining the most significant change with the new Constitution, the one in 1852, was in determining legislative representatives. So now, as before, slaves were counted as a population for just one part of government. They would be counted as a total population for both sets of government in Louisiana. So this was going to throw off the balance of power. So now the parts of the Louisiana where you did not have a large population, but you had a huge population of slaves, they were going to have more representatives in the Louisiana government than, say, cities like New Orleans and things like that. So that kind of threw everything off once again. Now, all of this tension that's happening in the United States with the slave states, the free states, representative government, you know, population versus, you know, inclusion of slaves, all of this is bubbling to the surface. This is all creating issues. And all these issues, it's like a powder keg. It's like getting worse and worse and worse, and eventually it just blows up. And that blows up into the Civil War. So right now, this whole peaceful, beautiful antebellum Louisiana is not so beautiful and peaceful as we can see from what we've learned. We know, number one, antebellum Louisiana was a cash crop economy. It was built on the back of slave labor and hard work. Number two, it was in constant turmoil, not only with war with Mexico and just, you know, states getting voted into the Union and whatever, but there was a constant conflict between the parishes in Louisiana as far as legislation would happen. We had all 3 different compromises, 3 different constitutions that were coming and playing. We had the new black codes that were coming in. We had all of these things happening in the antebellum South. And all of this is nothing but a precursor for the Civil War, which is what we'll talk about in the next chapter. So guys, make sure that you put in your code word. It's right here. Don't forget, this is the code word for this Miss Meyer show, not the exit tickets. Make sure you put it in correctly. Do your assignments. Make sure that you take advantage of your handy dandy study guide as well to study for tests. Fill out your guided notes. Do that, submit those, and watch the Miss Meyer show. And I'll see you guys later. Bye.
I switched the thing. Oh, all right. Do this.
Recording Belle's driving lesson. All right.
And then
your seatbelt on.
Check your mirrors.
I'm
checking
your
my
mirrors.
mirrors
Oh.
already. Dang.
Well, you're telling me to check my mirrors.
You know what, Mom? I don't appreciate it.
All right.
I think we are safe to go.
No, I'm practicing. This is what Dad taught me to do.
Okay. So you're adjusting your
Put
mirrors.
your foot on the pedal.
Good.
This is the pedal, right? Am I gonna like make it so
Yes.
bad?
Yes, remember, this one's gas.
All right.
Okay? Now don't take off like crazy. You gotta
Gosh,
gently
dang it, we're
take
gonna
off.
go straight flying.
Don't, no. Okay, all right.
Zero
Put your foot on the brake. On the brake. You
Oh,
put
the
your finger on the brake.
brake.
Yes.
This is the brake.
Yes. Now you can put it into drive.
Oh, the D.
D. Yes. Here we go.
Who are you sending this to?
I'm just recording you.
Are you gonna send this to your students?
Probably. All right. Okay. All right.
Mom, I know you're like really anxious right now, but I promise I'm not going to kill us.
Okay.
Never. Dad let me drive home once
I
121.
yeah, I can't believe that. I'm infuriated. Okay. All right, let's see if you can make the turn.
Stop saying okay. This turn? No.
No,
We're doing
this
this one
one.
up here. 'Cause
Yeah.
I already just turned and passed it up. We're gonna try. I'm gonna. Lord help me.
Pretend that you're in carpool line.
Lord help me. This girl gonna make me drive straight through this glass.
No, do not.
I'm ready to take
Don't channel Medea. All right.
I'm about to take the K and the B off this K
Oh,
mark.
goodness. Okay, good.
I know I'm good.
All right, let's see how. Okay, but you're gonna have to. Okay, this is a good example because you're gonna have to turn around to pull out. All right. Now you're gonna have to back up and turn the car around.
Oh, you can just do this.
Yeah, well, let's pretend you can't do that. You need to learn how to back up. You can't do that. You can't do this in like lots of traffic. Imagine if there are cars on here. You can't just.
There isn't.
Yeah, but the purpose of you is you learn how to back up. Trust me, it took me years to learn how to back up. All right.
I just feel like a snowball. I'm like way off.
Well, you're gonna have to drop off Vivian here at
Vivian?
school sometimes.
Go right up on the curb.
Okay. No! Stop! Wait! You're gonna bust my hubcaps. All right. Now stop. Like you're dropping off Vivian. Bye, girl. Bye, Vivian. All right. She's gone. All right.
Okay, well, we'll practice the backing up now.
Well, not here. You can't
I'm
back
not
up in the here.
Stop
Go.
yelling
Go
at
here.
me.
Oh, in the parking lot. And we'll practice. What are you gonna do? Good job.
No, Dad taught me
Look
that.
both ways.
There's no more coming.
I know, but you have to pretend.
Oh, there's no more coming.
Just pretend.
Useless. I was taught by the best.
Oh.
Dad.
Really? He tried to teach me how to drive. He didn't do very well.
Yeah, we can do
You're mean. Well, you're gonna hit the curb. Gosh, don't tear up my hubcaps. Okay, you're way.
it. Bye, Vivian.
We already dropped her off.
Go. Hi, Vivian.
She doesn't come out this way. There you go.
All right. Don't fear. I know what I'm doing.
Okay.
I'm gonna park.
Well, you're hitting all these cars. All these cars are here. You just ran in. All right, pull into a parking spot.
They won't know if I run away.
Well, don't do that. That's hit and run. Okay, so
Did I make it?
let me see.
How do I-
Wait,
how do-
you
wait,
put your
hold
foot
on.
on the brake. Brake.
Shoot! Wait, back up. Wait, I got.
Wait. Look at. Put your foot on the brake. All right. No. That's no. You did not get
Where am
it.
I supposed to go?
You need to get in between these two. There's white lines that you are
I don't
nowhere.
see them.
Yeah, because I don't know where the heck you are. You're not in a parking spot.
See, the
So-
white lines are right underneath here, so it means I'm right in it.
No.
I don't
Back
think-
up.
Actually, I do
Back up. You're already in reverse.
Oh, okay.
So back up.
How do I do that?
Just hit the gas. Not too much.
Or just
There you go. Look, you're backing up. I'm gonna follow your camera. All right.
How do I
No.
stop reversing.
Okay, that's that. But you gotta look at your camera because you don't want to hit the cars in back of you.
I don't
So
want to hit
now-
the pole in the back.
You're nowhere near the pole.
Okay.
So you're gonna have to turn a little bit. There you go. See, it guides you. It tells you where you're gonna go. See, now follow the lines. Follow the lines.
Hard.
These are your. This is where your car's gonna go. So it's gonna turn this way, but you want to get in between the
Mom.
white lines.
This is really difficult.
No, you're doing it. You're doing well. You're doing really well. All right, good. Follow the lines. Follow the lines. Follow the lines. All right, come on. You're almost there. Back up.
You know, it's
Just
really
a
hard.
little.
Parallel parking.
Oh, I don't know how to parallel park, so I couldn't show you. Good, you're doing really well.
I know.
All right, now when it starts to beep, stop.
Okay.
You can go back some more.
There's no beep.
All
I'm
right.
guessing we're done.
No, it means it gets good. Now you put it in park. Good job. All right, you did well. All right,
Did I make it?
look, you can do this. Oh, go ahead.
I did it.
I'm so proud of you! All right,
Oh, I did
now
it
we're gonna
again.
pull forward. We're gonna pretend that there's cars on the side of us. So you gotta pull up far enough so that you can like turn your wheel to the right so you don't hit the cars. Like I, remember how I did that? Okay. All right, go. No, put your foot on the brake.
Oh,
Brake.
sorry.
You can't ever turn without brake. There you go. Now go forward. Up, but don't hit this guy next to you. Pretend he's next to you. Now go up far. There you go. Good job. Good job. Look at you. All right.
Stop by the best.
Okay. Good job. You're a natural.
I know I'm a natural. So stop by the best.
Okay, well, I'm going to let the best come take you driving.
Why? You don't want to see me driving?
Well,
Are you anxious?
all right, turn
Are you
your
an
wheel.
angry doctor?
Yes, I am a doctor. I'm a doctor. Trust me. All right. He let you drive on 121.
What's 121? Is that the one by our house?
Yeah.
The one that goes to our house?
Yeah.
At the middle school?
Yeah. Is he insane?
But he was doing this with the wheel and I was like freaking out.
I know. I hate when he does that to me. So I was about to say. I mean, I don't.
I'm
He
really-
let you drive in our neighborhood with all the cars.
I'm really good at driving.
All right. You did very well, pal.
I'm not done.
You're an excellent driver.
I know. I'm better than you.
Golly, yeah, that's abuse. No, you just okay. You're a really excellent driver. Is that why you're driving in the fire lane?
Yeah.